One of the things that China was extremely strict on us about was if you're going to have access to this market and you're going to have access to market and promote this movie far beyond most movies, you need to shoot the movie here. You know, not all of it, but parts of it. And you need to have what they call first unit people over, which means having Don Cheadle and Gwyneth Paltrow and Robert Downey Jr. and having our director over there and showcasing the movie by shooting it, you know, so many days in that market and having a certain amount of the movie take place in China in the final cut.
Just what does it take to get a Hollywood film screened in communist China? How has the Chinese regime subverted Hollywood into its propaganda apparatus? And why did a self-proclaimed globalist who managed to get Iron Man 3 screened in Beijing's Forbidden City have a change of heart and realize he was pandering to China's Communist Party? In this episode, we sit down with film producer and media executive Chris Fenton, who's worked on blockbuster films like Iron Man 3, Point Break, and Looper. He is the author of the book Feeding the Dragon. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Chris Fenton, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
You have been, as I call it, in the belly of the beast. You've been in Hollywood, and part of your job has been to get Hollywood movies into communist China. You actually got Iron Man 3, if I recall correctly, premiered in the Forbidden City, which is, I think, the first of that sort of thing ever happening. Remarkable. And you also have had some introspection around your role and how this whole thing worked. It's an amazing story. You write about it in Feeding the Dragon, your book. But let's talk about this getting Iron Man 3 premiered in the Forbidden City, and what did it take to actually make that happen?
Well, it's a very colorful journey over a couple years of being involved with Marvel and Disney and all the filmmakers involved with that film. It started around late in 2011, and we released the movie in April of 2013. The process of getting it into China, the process of getting the approval to do the premiere in the Forbidden City obviously took a village. It wasn't just me involved. There were a lot of Chinese faces involved in that process. We had a very large infrastructure in Beijing. And where I came into play was as the conduit between the two countries. There were a lot of directives that were given by the Chinese government to our company, and then it was the company that would then translate them to me, and then I would have to find a way to make it tolerable to our partners here in the United States in regards to the kinds of things we needed to supply and the kind of efforts we needed to give in order to get government approval for Iron Man 3, both as a form of content to release theatrically there, but then also as a form of content or a product or service that we were marketing to their people. So we talked about it a little bit yesterday. In regards to China, there's two entities you have to sell to there. Number one is you need to sell your product or service to the Chinese government, and you need to portray it in a way that the Chinese government feels that it benefits them and their populace to allow you access to their market. And then you're allowed to then sell that product and service to their consumer. You're allowed access to that massive market. In between that is the narrative that needs to be approved. How are you going to market your product or service to that consumer? How are they going to digest what you're saying to them? How does the government look at the way that you're approaching that marketing and promotion of that product and service in regards to their overall agenda? Which brings us back to the Forbidden City. And the Forbidden City is the center of Beijing. And the center of China is Beijing. In fact, I like to say that China is the same size as really the continental United States from one side on the east to the west. Yet there's one time zone in China, and that time zone is whatever time it is in Beijing. And the center of Beijing is the Forbidden City. So when we really wanted to portray the importance of what the collaboration was in making this massive tentpole movie between the US and China, the best way to showcase that, we felt, was in the most revered part of China, and to showcase it with the star of that movie, who was Robert Downey Jr., who we brought over, and we did the first ever full-blown, premiere spectacle that not only was a premiere in the realm of what we typically think of in terms of Hollywood is concerned, but we also broadcast it nationally across the country. So the idea was to say, hey, US-China collaboration was done on this film. It should be supported by the Chinese government, and the Chinese consumer should consume it because you're just as much a part of this movie as the United States was. And that was the first.
Well, so this is interesting because basically, for those viewers that might at this point it not be obvious to, by doing this premiere, they're basically saying the Chinese Communist Party is fully behind this film. That's the message. And of course, for you guys at the time, that was a great marketing message, right?
Correct. And not only that, when it's obvious that the Chinese government is behind something that's foreign, suddenly you see a lot of other wind to your back. For instance, our offices were near they were inside the 2nd and 3rd Ring Road in Beijing, and we were close to a mall called U-Town. And inside U-Town, there was a pirated Marvel store where Marvel merchandise was sold without any of that monetization being shared by Marvel headquarters back in the United States. But when we started marketing and showcasing the fact that Iron Man 3 was coming, and when the populace started to realize that the government was behind us in supporting that endeavor, suddenly that pirated store disappeared. Just disappeared. And when you went to the Silk Market or some of the pirated stores where you could go buy some really interesting looking Marvel paraphernalia that was slightly off, but you could still find an Iron Man figurine or a different t-shirt or whatever, all of those disappeared too. Because the populace knew that the government was behind supporting this foreign IP, this intellectual property. And you didn't want to get caught selling something that was supported by the government now.
Interesting. So this is about as validated as you could be by the Chinese Communist Party. And probably a lot of our viewers are wondering why the heck you're sitting across from me right now. But no, I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, you were full on, believing globalist, so to speak, believing in the idea, but then something changed along the way, right? And I don't want to forget to talk about, how you actually got through the censorship regime. Let's make sure we mention that. But this piece about how did your thinking shift?
It was really after a congressional delegation trip, which I co-hosted with the U.S. Asia Institute, which, by the way, I'm not speaking on behalf of here, but it's a fantastic organization. But we had just gotten back in early September from taking 3 congressional members over to China. We met with Carrie Lam and the protesters in Hong Kong, and we also went up to Beijing and Xi'an and Chengdu. And during that process, I was also writing the book. And I decided to finish the book with an afterword that brought most of the story that ends in mid-2013 with Iron Man 3 opening and breaking every record, bringing it into the current day and the smell of pepper spray and, sort of my thoughts on where the US-China relationship was. And I was about to turn in that book. And then in October, Daryl Morey tweeted out his support for Hong Kong protesters. Daryl Morey, the Houston Rockets GM. And I saw that. I was standing next to another soccer dad on the side of a field watching my son play. And I said, wow, that's going to be a really interesting dilemma or problem for NBA in China. And he said, well, why is that? And I said, well, because Yao Ming really made the Houston Rockets the branded team in China, and I can guarantee the CCP has noticed this tweet. And I was right. But what I didn't know, and what I'd never even thought of through that moment and 20 years prior, was the fact that it woke up the majority of Americans to what was going on between US and China when it came to the capitalistic endeavors that we were pursuing. And that was this pandering to the CCP in order to get access to that super lucrative market. And that was the moment where I looked at it and I looked at the book and I said, oh my gosh, like I was part of the problem that now everybody's aware of. I need to relook at what I wrote and figure out how to implement certain thoughts throughout the book that make it more timely and more self-aware of what actually happened. And that's why I'm sitting here today. There's a lot to talk about in that subject matter, but you asked the question.
Right, no, of course. So let's talk about the pandering, and clearly there was quite a bit of pandering that would be required to get through the censors and to make it so that the Chinese Communist Party is, I guess, not just accepting, but kind of thrilled with the message that a film's going to have, right? Especially to be, validated at the top in the Forbidden City.
Yeah, well, 100%. So, there's different sorts of, when you're looking at the movie business itself, there's different sorts of ways that we can, look at pandering, for instance. There's the premeditated self-censorship where, you want the movie to play in the two largest markets in the world and make money, and that's the United States and China. So you obviously want to make a movie that's going to play to both of those markets. So part of that might entail maybe not making a movie about China winning a huge soccer game in the Olympics against the Americans and hoping that that movie plays in America. Well, the same reason why you might avoid having Chinese villains in a movie, that you want to have work in China. So there's the premeditated thought of, well, in this script, is this going to make it a better movie for both of those markets? Because quite frankly, if you get it to work in both of those markets, it will work in every other market. It's the toughest Venn diagram to find that concentric circle with, but if you make it work, it's magical around the world. So premeditated censorship is one, and that's one where I think it's going to be very difficult to, mitigate, because people are always thinking about that. In fact, you want it to work in Germany too, so you're going to think about things that aren't going to be insulting to that consumer, in Argentina and elsewhere. So that's one aspect of it. But another aspect involves the post-production aspect of censoring content that suddenly does offend the CCP, and they tell you need to change it. And the most current example of that has been what Senator Ted Cruz has brought to life, which is this Top Gun movie that's coming out shortly, where Tom Cruise is wearing a flight jacket and it happens to have the Taiwanese flag on the back of it. And Paramount Studios, wanting the movie to work in China, has removed it. But on top of it, like we saw with the NBA in the Daryl Morey tweet, their censorship, the CCP's censorship, is not just about their own market. It's about how they're portrayed around the world. Mm-hmm. So when Daryl Morey said something off of their soil, by the way, he was probably in Houston, Texas when he tweeted that out, the CCP not only punished, not only said, hey, we have a problem with that, but they also said, we have such a big problem with that we're going to ban not just the Houston Rockets from being shown in our market, we're going to ban the whole NBA. And you look at that and you go, well, wait a minute, that's censorship beyond borders, right? He said that not while he was on their soil and not to a Chinese, platform. He said it on Twitter in a country that's actually has freedom of speech. The same principle could be looked at where it's cross-border censorship with Top Gun. Paramount didn't just remove the flag from what's going to be seen in China. They removed it from the jacket that's going to be shown around the world. So China, the CCP, is actually exuding their influence with soft power beyond their borders and telling our companies what they can and can't show to the rest of the world.
Give me an example with this film specifically if you can, if you're able to, of some of the things you needed to do?
You're talking about Iron Man 3?
Sure.
Well, what was great about telling the story about Iron Man 3 is that the filmmakers at Marvel actually behaved and handled situations, I think, in the way that a lot of company heads should moving forward, which was they never were looking at how do we change this movie in order to make more money in China. It was always about, if we do this, does it make the movie better? Does it protect the brand? Will it make our fans who have built this brand over 50, 60 years happy with how it's implemented? And will it allow the rest of the world to feel good that this movie is the best quality movie that can be made? And Kevin Feige was the one running Marvel. He still does. He's a tremendous filmmaker, but he never said, when we would give him an idea, he'd be like, well, how much more money is that going to make us in China? Whereas, unfortunately, I think a lot of other management of other companies and other industries actually do ask that question. So to answer that question, there were many in the book. I actually get into a bunch of different debates we had with Marvel about things that we wanted to implement into the movie. One of the things that China was extremely strict on us about was, if you're going to have access to this market and you're going to have access to market and promote this movie far beyond most movies, you need to shoot the movie here. You know, not all of it, but parts of it. And you need to have what they call first unit people over, which means having Don Cheadle and Gwyneth Paltrow and Robert Downey Jr. and having our director over there and showcasing the movie by shooting it, you know, so many days in that market and having a certain amount of the movie take place in China in the final cut. Unfortunately, what happened, and I don't want to give too much away, but we had Robert Downey Jr. got hurt during that production. So we lost a lot of potential shooting days that we could have done in China. So we ended up shooting just second unit material in the market. And we did certain things that, you know, with the CCP's, you know, guidance to try to showcase the amount of movie making we were doing in that market and the amount of people that we were hiring with those second unit shots that were Chinese, and the amount of skill set and exchange that we were doing to help them build their own film industry, right? Because remember, the CCP is about how do we govern 1.4 billion people and keep them just happy enough that they don't revolt, right? You can't make them all happy. There's not enough resources on Earth. So how do you keep them just happy enough that they don't revolt? And part of that is giving them all of what they need and some of what they want. But another big part of that is also building their middle class. And how do you build their middle class? Well, you create industries that hire skilled labor, and the film industry is one of them. So every time we did a movie that we wanted to monetize that market with, we would have to find ways to bring in Chinese below-the-line crews, above-the-line talent into the process, not only so that they could be showcased in the movies themselves, but also so that they could learn the filmmaking process and learn the talents and the exchange and the skill set that Hollywood has essentially honed over the last 100 years. And for the government to see us do that type of exchange, they knew they had an argument within themselves and also one they could give to the populace of, hey, we're supporting this movie because China was involved in making it. And China is getting better at building a film industry into a world-class film industry, which is going to create middle-class jobs for you because of efforts like this. So that's why we're supporting this movie.
How important is Hollywood or Hollywood films or Hollywood involvement in China in the Chinese Communist Party soft power operation?
Well, it's one of the devices for sure. The beauty of filmmaking and the storytelling that's involved is that you can implement interesting messaging that's completely disguised by a fun, entertaining story. So when you look at even a Johnny Depp movie that we did. I was trying to think of interesting films that we had done where you implement certain things that fall in line with the CCP directive. But there's the opening of that film, Transcendence, which we did, which was not a successful film at all. It did pretty well in China, was involved Johnny Depp as a professor who's working on nanotechnology, and he doesn't want to be spied on, so he puts himself in this strange hut that has copper wires around it, and in that hut, you know, a compass doesn't work, can't find the north or the south, and there's a comment in there about how, you know, Europe created the compass in whatever it was, 1600 or something. And I remember from my engineering degree that there was something about the compass that had to do with China. So I did some research and I found out, you know, actually there was this guy, Shen Kuo, who created some apparatus that could figure out the poles. And that was in like 1000 AD, way before the West ever came across it. So we actually found one of his original books and we put it in the opening scene of Transcendence. We actually had to go to the archives at USC's library to find it. But we put it in there in the props so that we could showcase the fact that China was a part of some of the early scientific discoveries of the world, right? Point Break is another one, right? Where we did the remake and there was a scene in that movie where we were going to open up the film with a cold open, which is always that high action sort of impact, 3 minutes that gets you right into the movie. And it was going to take place in Shanghai. And it was going to take place in a building way up, like on the top floor of one of those massive buildings in the Pudong district. And it was a diamond store, a diamond showcase center. And these motorcycles were driving through, they got on the elevator, and they started taking all the diamonds. And then they drove out the building up on the 100th floor. And they had parachutes, and they were supposed to take the diamonds with them. But because they're sort of Robin Hood characters, they were going to spread the diamonds all over, you know, the city from the air. And then all the Chinese were supposed to pick up the diamonds because the Robin Hood effort, you know, won over the rich diamond dealers or whatever. But the Chinese government said, you can't do that.
I was going to say, this. I'm sure that one didn't go over very, very well.
They said, well, number one is our police would have caught them. And number two is, the Chinese people would not pick up diamonds that weren't theirs. So this does not make sense, right? So it's interesting when you're thinking about plot points on how you need to create either wind to your back or avoid the obstacles ahead. And now Hollywood is super coherent or super, you know, cognizant of that fact. And, you know, it's partially good business, but it's also partially not American values and interests that we should be protecting as a nation.
So, you know, what is the most outrageous thing that you can think of that censors demanded of you in your China film facilitating career?
Well, we did a movie with Bruce Willis and Joseph Gordon-Levitt called Looper, which is another sort of story I tell in the book. And what was interesting about that is that the movie takes place both in sort of the present day, maybe 5 or 10 years in the future, and then 40 years beyond that. And Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who's a young actor, plays the present day version of a character that Bruce Willis plays 40 years in the future. And the original script took the current day, which was done in the middle of America, and then in the future it was going to take place in France because that character, when he retired from his gangster sort of career, he was going to move to France. We ultimately decided, let's move him to China in the future. But what's interesting about China is that the CCP does not like time travel. In fact, it's banned from showcasing in movies or in various storytelling, especially from the West. And part of that is they want to control the narrative of where the future is going. And then anything historical, they want to control the way the history is told. So what we did in order to say to China, hey, we think this movie could make money from your consumer. We think your consumer likes these kind of movies. And it does have the future involved, which we know is a censored item. So what we want to do is work with you to figure out what you want your future to look like, and we'll put it in the movie. So we worked with the Shanghai municipal government, which is where the Shanghai locations took, or the China locations took place. And we said, what do you want your skyline to look like 40 years in the future? And we created all kinds of different designs. And they would pick some, and then they'd come up with some others, or they'd have plans for, ones they wanted to build or whatever. And then we would work with the CGI, post-production people and design those buildings so that when we actually shot the film, we created the skyline that the Shanghai government wanted there in 40 years. And that allowed the CCP to go, well, wait a minute. Even though this takes place in the future, which we don't like from Hollywood, and it actually has some criminal elements, and there was drug use, other stuff that's censored, they're also showcasing the fact that in the future, this Joseph Gordon-Levitt character who becomes Bruce Willis wanted to go there versus anywhere else in the world because that's the best place to live. And then on top of it, the movie created the backdrop of what we envision Shanghai to be, the center of the world, the most beautiful, sophisticated, technology advanced city on earth. That's what the movie's showcasing. So why wouldn't we let this in? Why wouldn't we want the public to see it here in China? And by the way, we want the rest of the world to see it too. And the rest of the world did. It made a lot of money and it was a very successful film.
And, frankly, it never occurred to me that this was a very subversive piece of Chinese Communist Party propaganda. I've seen it,
Oh, you saw Looper?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a good little movie,
Yeah, and
right?
I remember that it didn't end up in France. I remember it in China. That part didn't occur to me, but I bet it occurred to a lot of, I bet the China element really occurred to a lot of the people in the Chinese market that were watching it.
They loved it.
Yeah.
They loved it, and I'll tell you right now, the person in Indiana or the person in Brazil or the person in Germany didn't even notice the fact that there was a little bit of soft power that they digested from the CCP in that movie because the movie was entertaining and engaged them. That's the brilliance of movie making in regards to the ability for soft power to seep into any market. And that's also a reason why I feel like it's important for us to keep this exchange going between the US and China because we can use it to our advantage too.
So Chris, so far as we're sitting here, I'm not even 100% sure if you're advocating for this Hollywood relationship or, it's almost like you have some kind of mixed feelings here. But I know as a fact, and this is in an article that you published recently, a Hollywood ending for the coming US-China divorce. You are advocating for divorce. And tell me why.
Well, it's a complicated answer, so let me try to be concise with it. We have definitely, the rampant globalism, which I was a part of for 15 years, compromised a lot of American interests. And it had repercussions down the road that none of us involved with saw coming. So one of the things that I'm trying to bring to light is the fact that we did a lot of stuff to pander to get into that market. We did a lot of things that were much more beneficial to the Chinese than they were to Americans to get access to that market. And we were very beholden to investors and shareholders that were pressuring us to get that market open as much as possible to US goods and services. And we were successful at it, but the long-term ramifications for America were not great. And we cut to today where the Trump administration has definitely brought to light the fact that we have an unbalanced relationship with China, and it needs to change. I feel like the effort that he's brought forward to make us all aware of it is fantastic. There's been a lot of mistakes made along the way by various parts of our leadership where we haven't been quite as effective in changing it, but that's okay, as long as we're aware that there is an issue. So that brings me to why I think there's a divorce should happen. And part of that is in the best interests of America in the long term. But it also looks at the marriage between the US and China and asks, why did we ever do it to begin with? Now, I get the fact that we all believed in this mission and purpose of free market capitalism and rampant globalism was in the best interests of America. But we now know it wasn't. So what were the other reasons we had for bringing the two countries together in these nuptials? Part of it was the idea that we were going to bring them to become more like us. And I talk about this in the book. I call it Fenton's Five Forces, which is an homage to Porter's Five Forces of Business. But those are the forces of diplomacy that keep our two countries working together in communication. And I compare it to a cell phone and a cell tower, right? There's 5 bars that you want to have perfect communication. And you have national security, politics, human rights issues, commerce, and culture. And the idea, I think, that globalists originally had, or this push of U.S. entree into China at all costs, was that we could win them over on all those 5 forces. But the fact of the matter is, on human rights, politics, and national security, it's looking more and more like that's never going to happen. I'm not going to say that it won't happen. I'm just saying, as a practical realist, I'm saying let's pretend like they're never going to happen, at least any time in the future. So let's agree to disagree on those 3. So that leaves us 2 bars left in the cell phone tower to cell phone connection. And that's, I think, enough to feel comfortable that you have a relationship that's working. But if one of those drops, if we're just down to commerce or we're just down to culture, then you're down to 1 bar, and you're very close to what I think would be the beginning of another Cold War. And to me, Cold War is not what some people are saying today's relationship with China is. To me, it's no trade, no communication, like we had between 1950 and 1971. So my thought was, in that op-ed that I wrote recently, was that we should just admit that we're not going to agree on those 3 principles, which leaves us 2 left, which is only 40% of the 5. So that should be enough to say, let's get a divorce. But, like any divorce, there might be all kinds of intertwined issues, like kids, for instance. Let's figure out how to do the divorce amicably. And let's figure out how to have that amicable divorce create some new version of a relationship that's more balanced, that's based on the 2 things that we can find that concentric circle in the Venn diagram, and that's culture and commerce. But that culture and commerce also has to be reset, because as Donald Trump and the administration and various others have said, we have a trade imbalance issue where accounting procedures that are done by the Chinese are not the same as U.S. companies. We have certain protectionist policies and tariffs that the Chinese have over us that we don't have. There's certain status that they have as a developing nation under the WTO versus a developed nation like we are. We need to change those. And even with Hollywood, and I would bring Hollywood into also things like the NBA, let's figure out what is the proper way that they're allowed to censor things and censor our speech without repercussions beyond where their jurisdiction is. So I would argue with Hollywood, they can censor things for their market. That's okay. Why? Because we're okay with it with Japan, we're okay with it with Korea, and we're okay with it with the Middle East and other markets. So in the effort of finding compromise, let's let them do that. But they can't dare go beyond their border and tell us what we can or cannot have in those movies for the rest of the world. And in order to do that, the nation has to get behind the studios and the filmmakers that are in charge of those decisions and say, we have your back. If they retaliate because Germany can see that Taiwanese flag, then we're going to come down with them with the force of this nation, with whatever that leverage point is that we think is there. The NBA, the same thing. I mean, there was a big cry for LeBron James and the rest of the NBA to come out and support Hong Kong. But the fact was, there was no national effort to support what repercussions that would have against the NBA. So if the NBA did that, or LeBron James, who has 20 million a year or whatever it is coming out of China every year, stood up for those Hong Kong protesters and then lost all that endorsement money, all that potential income, he would have just been a sacrificial lamb. So we need to say, hey, LeBron, we're going to back you as a country, and we're going to make a statement on your behalf and on the behalf of all people in the United States. That way you're protected in your free speech right to be able to say what you want to say about it. But that didn't happen. So, it's a very difficult situation because you want to say, LeBron, say something. Stand up for Hong Kong. But at the same point, it's easy for Senator Marco Rubio to tell him to do that. But Marco Rubio doesn't have $50 million a year in endorsement money coming out of China, so he can say all he wants. LeBron has to make the sacrifice. And if he has to make the sacrifice, maybe as a nation, we back him so that we all create the leverage to make sure that he says what we all want him to say, but he doesn't feel the wrath when none of us else do.
It's interesting, right at the beginning of your book, it's very stark. You actually start it with a little, I don't know if you call it a plate or something. It's not exactly a preface. It's a very short line, almost like a dedication to self-reflection. I thought that was fascinating. Yeah.
Well, there were times where the movie business is a very high-profile endeavor. So that particular movie, because it was so big and involved big stars and involved the two superpowers, it was on the cover of New York Times and Wall Street Journal and all the different big publications around the world. And there were times when I would see, in fact, I cite one in the book where I was called out for being a Benedict Arnold, and I went to panels where I would talk and people would come up behind me and say, you're a shill for China. And I never, to me, I felt like I was a true patriot of the United States during that time. Why? Because we were opening a market that we were making money in where that money wasn't makeable at any other point in time. And that money, part of it, not enough of it, but part of it was coming back to the United States. So we were increasing GDP of the U.S. in whatever small part. And that also was allowing us to finance more production days and various other components of the movies, which created more jobs. So increased GDP and increased, increased jobs for the U.S. made sense to me as far as a mission and a purpose. On top of that, I also felt like everything that we got into that market in a stronger way that could penetrate more of their consumers was getting more of the soft power message of the West into the East. So I felt good about that too. So when people said you're a shill or you're a Benedict Arnold or whatever it was, I always brushed it off because I was like, you don't understand what we're actually getting done. Why, I'm not gonna listen to you. And when the Daryl Morey tweet came out and I started to self-reflect on it and I start to see where we are today with the supply chain issues, with the fact that we've shipped a lot of our middle-class jobs overseas, the pandering, the censorship, the certain things that we do that are part of the CCP initiative that aren't in the best interests of Americans, I start to realize I was complicit in doing what those people, those critics were saying I was doing. And now I'm thinking differently about it and thinking, how do I approach this? How do I get to an audience enough where I say, hey, look, none of us were bad people. We were driven by a mission and purpose that was fed to us by lots of leadership around the world, this globalist free market capitalism idea. And we were just trying to get the job done. And we felt like we had a purpose and mission that was right. But now it's not. We realize it's not. There's a lot of benefits to a very strategically reset version of what we were doing. So I want to make sure that that's out there. I don't think we want to go to war with China, and I know we don't want to start a Cold War with China. But we need to reevaluate how we're doing it, and we need to do it as a country together. This is not a red or blue issue. This is red, blue, purple, and everybody in between. We need to get our thinking caps on and get smart about this and figure out how we're going to tackle it. Otherwise, like you're saying, we're just going to keep kowtowing to the CCP, giving them what they want on behalf of shareholders and investors that just simply want to make as much money out of that market as possible.
You know, I was just thinking as you're talking, when we were talking offline earlier, you have a very good perspective on the power of the Chinese Communist Party propaganda apparatus. You kind of described it to me. And I'm wondering if you could kind of elaborate on that and how ubiquitous it is. It was, you had a really very interesting way of putting it. And I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit for our audience.
Okay, so just in regards to structure of it, obviously you have Xi Jinping, who runs the country, but he's got 6 other standing committee members. So there's 7 members of the standing committee. And then you have the rest of the Politburo and the rest of the Communist Party. And then you have the National People's Congress, right, which is sort of the rubber stamp side of things. But under the Communist Party, the CPC, is an organization called the Ministry of Propaganda, or the Propaganda Ministry, or various versions of that name. They dictate the messaging that goes out to their populace. And that messaging is carried by everybody in government. They all carry the party line. In fact, when I co-host congressional delegation trips to China, we hit all the different entities of government. And then we hit some of the private sector and the SOEs and various other entities. And they all almost say the exact same thing in every room. It's unbelievable. And to me, that is why I believe in those bars that we talked about earlier, national security, politics, and human rights. There are issues there that are part of the party line that are disseminated across the whole populace. And yes, there are sectors of the populace that have the financial wherewithal or the resources to be able to get news from outside of the country. And there's the VPNs and getting beyond the firewalls. But the majority of the people there hear that one party line, and they believe in it. So when we're saying, oh, well, you know what, eventually they're going to want to overthrow their government, or eventually they're going to get behind human rights the way we are, the way they're going to say the South China Sea is, not China's to have, like we're going to win them over as long as we keep pushing that narrative. Well, they're not really hearing that narrative. They're hearing the narrative from the Ministry of Propaganda. And to liken it to the United States, which we talked about before, is I look at how steadfast people are on the red or the blue side of things. It's very bifurcated. And it's because each side is getting one party line that's following one real narrative. And no matter how much the liberal side thinks Donald Trump is doing stuff wrong and wants his supporters to believe the same thing, his supporters believe he's doing everything right. And those supporters think that the left is doing everything wrong. And that's because you have CNN and MSNBC and Rachel Maddow and Don Lemon and everybody else touting one. And then you have on the other side, you have Fox and Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh and Tucker Carlson talking about another narrative. And by the way, we've talked about it before, there's some people we think are pigeonholed in both sides that are actually much more in the middle than a lot of people believe, but everybody's got their blinders on. But imagine if you had all of that narrative put together in the United States with one party line. Then suddenly all those steadfast supporters that were following that and following that are suddenly following the same. And then everybody's in line. And that's what's happening in China. The Chinese people, the populace, believe the government is doing everything well. If they didn't, we would see another Tiananmen Square uprising. And the CCP knows that. And they're super smart, super intelligent about the way that they decipher intelligence through. And we know mutual friends like Steve Bannon who are calling it an information war, part of the unrestricted warfare PLA directive, right? They're very good at information and they're very good at propaganda. And we're seeing that not only inside of their country, but we're also seeing it outside too.
Well, so, all the time, and actually this whole coronavirus situation kind of is a good window on this, but all the time there's people who are, patriotic whistleblowers, so to speak, right? Because the Chinese Communist Party is involved in all sort of malfeasance and so forth. So in this case, you had these 10 doctors, which of course, we're all familiar with, that when early on said there's a big problem that's happening, and that even though it was very quickly censored and kept from a lot of people, still there were some significant number of people that learned that there was something different than the Communist Party propaganda at the time, and were worried, and that the word did get out. So this is something that's constantly happening there. At the same time, there's also, I think it's over 300 million people who have actually quit the Communist Party as part of the Quit the Communist Party movement, so to speak. Again, not publicly. There is a consciousness in China that this may not be the system that everybody wants for the future.
Well, there's definitely dissent, 100%. And I'm not saying, there's 1.4 billion people there. Let's say 200 million want something different. But who wants something different enough to go up against the iron fist of the CCP right now? Like, you're going to need strength in numbers. You're going to need the leverage of a large part of that population to want to do that. And the CCP understands that and knows that well. And their directive when it comes to messaging and narrative is so powerful that they know that they can flip a switch. The worst case scenario, in a worst case scenario where they can't flip the switch in something that's a little more, peaceful or subtle, they go national. They go nationalistic. I was there in 2012 when there were issues with, we talked about the truck going through Forbidden City and killing people. There were the bus station stabbings, et cetera. There was a lot of things that were starting to boil up and show, whoa, we might be heading towards another June 4, 1989. And instead of trying to figure out a way to calm the masses through, an achievement like, we just brought another 100 million people into the middle class, they decided to instead send some ships over to the Rocky Islands that are disputed between Japan and China and start to lay claim on those and create this, rally around the flag narrative with Japan. And before you knew it, everybody forgot about their discontent in China and started, throwing Molotov cocktails outside of the embassy for Japan. You saw Toyotas and Nissans overturned in Shanghai's streets. There's a great sort of rally around the flag opportunity there that they always know they can do. And even in this COVID crisis where, let's face it, there were a lot of wrong moves made by the CCP in regards to curbing what the problem was that they had. But the rest of the world has a lot of issues with COVID too, and the rest of the world is creating some nice opportunities to create narrative around that deflect off of their deficiencies and make it seem like somebody else's problem.
Any final words before we finish up?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's been an honor to be on the show. I'm a fan and have enjoyed many of these interviews. It's interesting. For me, it's about really trying to talk about this with as many points of view as possible, because I know I have a very strong applied practical experience between the two countries. And I know I had a mission and purpose that I believed in at one point that now I think was detrimental to the country. But I'm still very, very adamant that we avoid a Cold War between the two. So my feeling is, and as I'm entering the lecture circuit, is like how to best get people on board with the fact that we don't want a Cold War. We want to continue some sort of exchange that benefits America, yet we need to do it without compromising our interests. And if we do that, I honestly believe in the long run, it's going to be very good for America and also for the world. But we cannot I can't do this myself. No one can do it by themselves, and no one political party can do it by themselves. We actually all have to get together and decide this is what we want to do, and we got to put the leverage of the nation behind it, because when the country does get behind something, we can get anything done we want. And I do believe that, I talk about how I don't think we're going to win them over on those three, but if we win over a reset in the way that we work culturally and commercially that benefits Americans way better than it has, and we get that accomplished, it's like a baby step approach, right? Like China's, one of the big issues that companies have when they enter that market is they see the world as their oyster and they can grow and grow and grow and oh my gosh, think of how great this is going to be, but they can never execute the very first thing that needs to get done to get to the next one, to get to the next one. Perhaps if we look at it in a baby step approach where we say, okay, let's divorce, let's forget about those three right now. Let's continue on the commercial and cultural exchange, but let's do it in a smart, strategic way that benefits America and protects what's important to us. And if we can get that done, then let's focus on the big prize. Because I think that will help us show that we can make achievements there. But then on top of it, that achievement is also going to back us in getting there too. And maybe that's the goal that we need to set. But just have that baby step or that one step in between.
I'm going to ask you another question before we finish up because I have to. You know, you're familiar with the what's typically called organ harvesting industry in China. I'm sure if you've watched some American thought leaders interviews, we've talked about that a number of times. How can you have a commercial relationship? I mean, this is. I ask myself this question because there's some things that you're saying that make a heck of a lot of sense to me. We need to be able to communicate. I agree with you. However, how can you have a commercial relationship with a nation where the state sanctions murder for organs for a big dollar in a multi-billion-dollar industry? You know, if you know that's a reality and you accept that.
Yeah, you had a guest on, Arthur Waldron, recently who compared it to going into a store that you go to every day to go buy your groceries, and then one day you find out that they have all these harvested organs in the back and they have this whole other market that's going on in the back. Do you keep going to that front market knowing that the back market's there, and what is that saying about you? It was a great metaphor. And I do think that it is something that falls under perhaps the human rights aspect, or even more severe than that. I mean, the organ harvesting scenario is terrible. But for some reason, we've been able to live with it with other countries too. I mean, Saudi Arabia, for instance, the way we are okay with doing business with them versus their human rights issues. It's a moral and philosophical question that we need to ask ourselves as a country. We need to realize that the almighty dollar seems to be driving us in regards to how we make these decisions, and we need to decide whether we want to change that. And I think more importantly, we need to try to make it consistent around the world, not just with one market versus another. So to answer your question, I don't know how we handle that psychologically. We do. So what does that say about us? I don't know, but I'd like to believe that we all want to try to fix that. And I think that starts with how we approach baby steps to getting there and putting the leverage of the nation behind us rather than just having different fractions of us shout out causes and hope that, you know, sacrificial lambs keep sacrificing themselves. Because like we know, we as a nation, if we want to pursue something together, we can definitely affect change. But that one's a difficult question.
No, absolutely. So let's finish up on this note. You mentioned earlier that this isn't a red or a blue issue for America. This is, although it seems at this time that it is, like just looking at the face of it, it looks like much more of a red issue, like Republican. But you know, there is this Blue Dog coalition that's, you know, interested in looking into how China is accountable, the Chinese Communist Party is accountable for coronavirus. Frankly, you're working with Congress. What are you doing to facilitate this kind of becoming much more of a red and blue issue?
Well, number one is the Democrats, and like we talked about, I'm nonpartisan in this issue, but I would really like to see the Democrats take this issue to heart and start making it a priority. If you look at some of the most important principles that the Democratic Party has supported, from middle class and labor, rights and issues, to human rights, to censorship and the freedom of creative expression, and all that stuff that China obviously does not see eye to eye with us on, the Democrats should be fully into this. So one of the things I'm doing, whether as a speaker on the lecture circuit or in promoting the book or being a voice in this, is trying to get on as many platforms that cater to the blue audience as the red, because we need to get together as a collective to combat this issue and to tackle this challenge. Because quite frankly, the China issues that affect us as a country are really not bordered by red or blue politics. I mean, 90% of this country, we talked about how opening that market to products and services has really benefited shareholders and investors. But unfortunately, a lot of this country is not benefiting from that windfall. They might be benefiting from cheaper goods at a Walmart, but they're also really not benefiting from the fact that factories have moved out of their town and middle-class jobs have moved out, or maybe even the IP that they created in their basement is now being used without any monetization over in China. So we need to address this from the Democratic side. So I'm trying to get the voice out, whether it's in front of large crowds or whether it's on TV or in podcasts or radio. And I know you have red and blue that listen to this and watch this program. So hopefully they spread the word too. But it's an important issue for all Americans.
Well, such a pleasure to have you on.
Such an honor. Thank you.